Thank you for being here. Welcome to today's program on suburban and downtown commercial real estate and the evolving decision-making process. We have a fantastic program for you today. Before we dive in, just want to make sure you all know that you are part of this conversation. Please use the chat function, the chat key, or the Q&A key to chime in, ask questions of today's panelists, and I will kind of moderate those and sprinkle those in as they are appropriate. First, want to start out and thank all of the 2020 CAR-W annual sponsors. We wouldn't be where we are today without all of them. So thank you to all of you who are on the call, and thank you to all of our sponsors. Before I introduce the panel, just quickly overview of the topic. The disruption caused by COVID-19 has had an impact, obviously, on all sectors of commercial real estate, whether it's retail, industrial, and office. But the office market is one that over the past few years, in Milwaukee at least, in Metro Milwaukee, has experienced tremendous growth in absorption, vacancy, new construction, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, the suburban market, which has been traditionally strong, has also seen its share of changes and new construction. At the core, we know that this disruption has forced office users to do something they never thought possible, and that is operating with a remote workforce. Now they are left to decide how they grapple with the learnings from this experiment as they negotiate office leases, make plans for expansions or relocations, or entirely reevaluate their business and operations model. Nationally, we have seen Amazon double down on its need for office space across 6 markets, and we have seen REI, which just built a brand new corporate headquarters in Seattle, put the building up for sale, citing a shift to a hub and spoke model for employees. There seems to be a no one-size-fits-all solution, but our discussion will tap into the expertise of 4 local and national commercial real estate experts as we explore these shifting decision factors for site selection as it pertains to office location. What do the data tell us, and what do client actions really say? So let's get started with our introduction from our panelists. We're going to start with Heather Turner-Loth.
Hi everyone, my name is Heather Turner-Loth. I lead workplace strategy at Epstein Ewan Architects along with project development here. Been in the industry for 20 plus years. Wow, that sounds like a long time, and excited to be a part of this conversation.
All right, Gay.
Oh, hi, Gay Coroton from the National Association of Realtors. I'm the Director for Housing and Commercial Research there. I've been with NAR since 2012, 8 years. So just happy to be here with you and share with you what I know and what I research at the national level, and try to tie that in with some knowledge I have about Milwaukee.
Matt, how about you?
Hi everybody, Matt Dorner. I serve as the Economic Development Director for Milwaukee Downtown Milwaukee's Business Improvement District. I've been with the organization for about 5 years, but the organization's existed for 23 years, really founded around the core principles of creating a clean, safe, friendly, and economically viable downtown. My background is in urban planning, and again, happy to be here.
All right, Greg.
Yeah, Greg Schimenti. I'm with Cushman & Wakefield. I've been with the firm 15 years. I'm out of Chicago, and I lead the Americas tenant rep practice.
Fantastic. All right, so we are going to get started with our first question. And this is focused, if Gay, you could weigh in on this. In just this short time since COVID-19 and work from home, what do the numbers tell us about companies' reactions to lease renewals and lease rates nationally?
Nationally, we've seen leasing volumes severely slumping, especially in 2002. So we didn't see that much in the first quarter, but in the second quarter, this is all when the impact really came crashing, if I might say. Leasing volume is down by about, I'd say, 50 to 75%, depending on whether you look at Colliers or whether you look at JLL. But that's the rate that we're seeing, a massive drop with regard to leasing volume. Now, with respect to rents, rents have not actually fallen. sometimes you'll hear they're up a bit, sometimes they're down, but you could say that rents have essentially not yet been impacted in the way that volume has been impacted. And on the investor side, data from Real Capital Analytics is also saying that investments are down by about 75%. So right now, the work from home effect and the economic fallout and the wait and see decision mode are all impacting on the office commercial sector.
So are you noticing a difference between a city, at least in the data side, the difference between a city like Chicago or New York and one like Milwaukee or Cleveland?
Yeah, so each geography has its own reaction to the COVID crisis and the work from home. Sometimes based on the severity of its initial impact and the duration of some of the stay-at-home and government regulations. But all the volume numbers that were described are generally accurate. We're seeing that across the board, almost regardless of city or region. But there are some sectors, for instance, the industrial sector, that is not having that severe of an impact. It's still down year over year in some cases, but the office has taken the brunt of the hit. Interestingly, the corporations are deciding to not decide. So this 1 year renewal, even for 2020 expirations, or even having a 1 year or a short-term renewal with 2021 expirations, is really what is happening as people try to decide what they need to decide in the future. So it's just a lot of short-term pushes. The investor community is happy to do that. The occupier community needs to do that because they can't make significant decisions in an environment with so much uncertainty.
Greg, when you're working with clients and they're asking for a 1 year extension on their lease or some time, what is happening kind of behind the scenes? What are they thinking about? Are they thinking about, do I stay in my downtown office tower? Do I move to the suburbs? Or are they looking at changing their footprint or just reconfiguring their office entirely?
So all the above. So for a company that has a single location, that's the most strategic important thing. And if they are feeling date pressure, they're not going to succumb to that date pressure. They just want more time to see how the next month or quarter plays out, or even the next year. And also, if their businesses has been negatively impacted, they don't know how soon they can get back to a more steady growth. So their thinking is, with one location, this is as important a decision I'm ever going to make. For a portfolio, our corporate real estate executives are looking at their portfolio in a new way to do what you said, which is to possibly reposition to a suburban location in support of a CBD location, or to allow smaller locations to expire, or in some cases decide to continue its occupancy, but with a new type of space plan, a new way to occupy that space. I'll just say this, the corporates that we're talking to, and we're talking to a lot, every single one of them is not taking this as a victim. They're not passively thinking about this. They're just moving some dates into the future so that they can make probably what would be some significant moves over the next couple of years.
Well, and this really, Matt or Greg, I mean, when you talk about a city like Chicago or a city like Milwaukee, I mean, those are very, very different cities, as it were. Matt, maybe can you speak to what Milwaukee is seeing in terms of this shift and how they're reacting to this, and some of the brokers that you're speaking with?
Yeah, I think on a larger, more macro scale, I think everything that Greg says is very consistent with what we're also seeing here. I think those that are in the position to be able to sort of push a larger scale decision are definitely taking advantage of that. I think that Milwaukee, but to your point, is definitely different in terms of its size and its sort of, I think, ability to sort of bounce back on a little bit quicker scale and maybe even reoccupy some of its space. We just rolled out a survey. Actually, it was about midsummer. We're gearing up to do a follow-up survey right after Labor Day. Now that a lot more decisions have been made sort of on school and a variety of other things that might have an impact on folks reoccupying space. but we're seeing somewhere in the vicinity, I think Greg and I talked about this a little bit, about 33% or 1/3 of our workforce sort of returning back into the downtown environment, where I understand, in some conversation with Greg, it seems in Chicago, it's far less than that. And I think, in talking with some of our employers, that's a pretty accurate estimate at this point. And now we look forward with just the continued decisions. I mean, everything with sort of what's going on is changing so rapidly. So as an organization, we try to, in our sort of hyper-focused area, try to touch base with our employers and property owners and managers as much as possible, just to make sure that we're sort of have our hand on the pulse and we assist in any way. So we look forward to going back out, but it does feel like sort of downtown, and just I think every week it feels like a little bit more energy, but I think we're feeling about that 33% as being pretty accurate, and I'm testing it against some of our employers. That's about right. We have others that are back at a greater percentage of that, absolutely, and then others that are going to be taking more time. But as an average, that's sort of where we're at.
Do you think any of this speaks to the makeup of our maybe downtown workforce versus Chicago's workforce in terms of percentage of employees who would be in hospitality or the service sector and their ability really to work from home? I know, Gay, you had done some significant research on this.
Yes. When you think about working from home, you think, what are the factors, right, that might drive working from home decisions? So one would be, for example, how long you're thinking, the company's thinking, well, how long are my employees, how long does it take for my employees to travel, right? So the survey asks workers who are working from home now, do you want to go back to work? And, a lot of them are saying that I don't want to go back to work because I'm going to save time on travel time. If you look at, say, Chicago, they're spending more time traveling than they do in Milwaukee, right? So in that sense, I think there's greater pressure for the work from home experiment to kind of become more permanent, more long-term in Chicago than it would be in Milwaukee. So the other thing also that companies are looking at, because they're doing all this in the interest of the employee, right? I think two things. They're trying to assess, am I going to let my employers work from home because it makes sense for them, but also at the same time, because it makes sense for me, I can cut down on costs, right? If a CBD office space costs much more than a suburban or them working from home, that's a great savings. So in terms of just the commuting, Chicago is certainly more traffic, more time for people to travel. So there's more pressure for companies in Chicago to say, hey, maybe yes, let's have our workers from home rather than in Milwaukee. So now as I was looking at the data, I'm not trying to think that the pressure in Milwaukee isn't that great as it is in Chicago or in New York or in San Francisco. So I'm now getting to be a bit more upbeat about the prospects for companies to stay, in fact, downtown. And if you look at San Francisco, what did they do, right? So they had this hub and spoke model, but it was really the cost of housing that was driving the employers, their employees to live in the suburb. But what were they doing? They were using buses, these tech buses, to transport them back to the hub. So really the hub was still the center of office life, of interaction, of creativity. It's just that people were forced to live outside where housing was more affordable, and because of the tight supply in San Francisco. And again, I don't see that in Milwaukee. Housing costs in Milwaukee are very affordable. So based on the research that we were doing, we were trying to assess a work from home potential for many of these counties. So Wisconsin and Milwaukee, not so much as in the other areas. But having said that, if among just the Wisconsin counties and based on the ranking that I did, like of course Waukesha and Zaki, I hope I'm pronouncing those right, are potentially the areas, because they're close to Milwaukee, that will benefit from any work from home dispersed model that might come in the future.
Yeah, that's great. And what we've just seen from some of the housing reports, it is a tight housing market right now, spurring a lot of new construction and a lot of expensive materials. So this is going to be an interesting story along those lines. Heather, I know.
I can just add real quick, and then I just want to, I like Gay's point, because I think ultimately Milwaukee, one of the things that we've always talked about as a competitive advantage is sort of the slogan, like you're 15 minutes from anywhere, whether you're downtown to the airport, et cetera. And that's always been one of the competitive advantages that we've always pitched from a downtown organization such as ourselves. I just think that further gets exemplified as we sort of talk about the quality of life factors, and as people are getting used to even not having a commute, or what's that lesser commute. So I do think it's an opportunity for Milwaukee in particular, a city of our size, to really capitalize on. So
yeah,
that leaves me optimistic.
Yeah, that accessibility is certainly important. I want to turn to Heather now. Kind of along these lines, I know you had done some work with the hub and spoke model and advising clients. Can you speak first to how the clients are making those real estate decisions in 2019, whether it's transforming their office space, and really what they're looking at now? Is it different or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so if we look at like 2019, at the heart of every conversation was talent. How are we going to recruit, engage, and retain talent? And so I think that's really what drove a lot of the real estate decisions. It's certainly what drove office design for us. In some instances, we were really looking at that HR tour path and highlighting those places that reflected the culture of an organization along that HR, recruitment path. We were also looking at, how do we support employee engagement and retention through more choice and control, which is, really where people can work their best: well-being, inclusion, knowledge sharing among generations, de-siloing of organizations. So a lot of that was taking place kind of pre-COVID. What I'm finding interesting now in the conversation is talent is still at the core of these conversations. It's just the engagement side of the equation isn't necessarily coming to light quite yet, it seems. So I think companies really need to look at this specifically for their own organizations. Each one has their own business objectives. Each has their own culture. Some employees really enjoy this kind of remote work. Others aren't enjoying it. I'm one of them. I'm not enjoying this at all. So I think this is, again, a really important part of the equation. How are we going to engage with employees? How are we going to retain them? We're in a more transactional work environment. And I think this is ultimately going to drive office decisions. It's going to drive design decisions on how best to support employees in any facet an organization chooses. So.
Well, it's interesting because you're seeing, across the board, some companies are saying like Epic, I think it was, they had said, everybody come on back, and, the employees said, no. And so they're all back working from home, but there was definitely something around the decision that was made. And so, as leaders, as, CEOs, obviously, real estate being probably one of the if not the largest, piece of the equation for your company, is certainly going to be of consideration. So I want to ask too, if any of the trends that you've been seeing have been accelerated during this time. We talk a lot about how this pandemic has really accelerated a lot of things that were already in motion, whether it was the closure of stores or, the adoption of technology. Can any of you speak to that from a real estate decision-making perspective?
Well, I can maybe hop in. I just mentioned the choice and control around employee engagement. And I think that in of itself, where can I do my work best, has been amplified. And so again, there's some employees that do their work best from their home environment, and there's others that can do their work best, in the office. And I think, Greg, you and I, this panel was kind of during the prep, we're talking about, offices were never fully full. You've got some actual numbers on that, but they were never fully full pre-COVID. So we were already somewhat transitioning to more of a flexible work environment. And so I think post-COVID, that's really truly been amplified. I think Gallup did a survey back in 2017, 43% of employees reported that they worked remote at least part of the time. So I think that part's been amplified.
So what does that mean for CEOs making those real estate decisions in the future? Is this going to be about locating in a place where there's better access to their space? Is it going to be closer to the employees? Is it going to be where they can have the best access to broadband or technology? Does this make the case for suburbs, or is this going to be a case-by-case decision? And Greg, I would kind of look to
I'm
you
like,
on. I think
I
you
was
had
going to say yes, like a general yes, but Greg, hop on that.
Yeah, sure. I'll go back to the accelerating thing because I thought that was a great question. So how real estate professionals do their business, everything had to get very virtual very quickly. So the virtual tours, there's technologies out there that allow people to create tours of their space, which we saw on the residential side kind of take over that business. And it was slow to get to the commercial side. We've been forced to do that. And I think that's a good thing for the industry. And in addition, for owners, investors, asset services, smart building technologies, how the building is maintained and how there's reporting created. And I think for occupiers, it's accelerated the need to have inventory management and more control of who's coming into the office and then where they are seated in the office in a way that there was always a solution, but it was never heightened to the degree that it is now. So those are both accelerating trends. And the decisions around CEOs, what they're doing, I think the most important change is that it's now the chief human resource officer who is with the CEO making those decisions. To be honest, they were rarely involved in decisions before, less than 20%. Now, pretty much every conversation we have with the corporate includes the CFO, the CEO, the head of HR, IT, because people have to be effectively working at home. It is a joint C-suite decision. And frankly, I think it leads to better decisions anyway, even with us having to come out of COVID. But I don't know what their decision criteria is going to be. I do believe people will be able to work without being close to the hub. And I think that will change some recruiting and retention strategies for companies because they could find high-level talent, maybe for less money, in different parts of the country when before they had a bias to hire around a particular geography.
Well, and that kind of begs the question about, quality and quantity, productivity versus culture. I know that's a big spot for both of you. And I would argue too, even Matt, from a downtown perspective, how important is that going to be in the future? And in the short term, how are you measuring that to help make some of those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the verdict is going to continue to be out for the immediate term on a lot of those factors. I think if I look at from what our organization is based in and what organizations like ours are founded in, we've had to pivot quickly to respond to sort of what's going on and how do you continue to create a downtown environment that is welcoming, conducive, and continues to be attractive for employers and employees. I mean, if I start looking at, you kind of mentioned the acceleration thing earlier, I think there's been some things that I hope that stick as a result of this are some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. For example, looking at how do we take over streets and public spaces and truly sort of provide these third spaces in the downtown environment that allow people to socially distant, be safe, but yet still enjoy the urban environment, which it offers all of the things that it always has. So, I mean, we've worked with our bars and restaurants to take over parking lanes that, I think I've seen some studies that driving's been down, about 33% or give or take, and maybe even greater. How do you reclaim some of these spaces to make them active to continue to support small business? So I think we've been able to work really closely with the city side of things to think a little bit quicker than government typically might want to on how do you kind of quickly pivot and put some actions in place that help to stabilize the environment. And we'll continue to do that. And I think to Greg's point, as these locational decision components shake out, are they the same? What's different? Those are the things that organizations like us, and we have to work with our municipalities and even the regional perspective. Those are the things that we really need to focus our investment on because those are going to be, again, driving decision factors. And if we want to be a choice place for living and business to locate, that's where we have to put our emphasis.
Well, can those things be recreated in maybe the suburbs? I mean, are you going to see more of that, or is that,
I think that's we've been seeing the mixed use environments pop up, and there's several that West Allis has been doing a great job. I think walkability is king. I mean, I live in the 3rd Ward. We're continuing to work from home, but if I didn't have the sidewalks and the trees and the parks and the public space and access to the public market, I still think that's going to be a choice decision driving factor from a living perspective. Absolutely. There's no doubt that any municipality should be looking at the walkability, their public spaces. I mean, and I think what's good for the larger region is good for downtown and vice versa. But I think anybody that's paying attention would be looking at trying to put those types of developments in their respective communities. I think downtown's got the edge on that. I mean, the historic core, we have the natural amenities with Lake Michigan and Three Rivers converging that we can all access and leverage. But there's no doubt that, I mean, I spent time working for a municipality that is a suburb of Milwaukee, and those are the type of initiatives that we started working in on our historic downtown in that community.
Yeah, Matt, I mean, I feel like this speaks to like the culture of an organization and the ability to have people connect with one another and build relationships. The same holds true for downtown environments or some of these, you know, suburban type environments with, you know, amenities to go to. How many times have we been sitting, you know, even you and I, Matt, sitting at a coffee shop downtown and we bump into each other. We haven't seen each other in a while. Oh, shoot, we got to get something on the calendar. I mean, those chance interactions, I think are core to kind of a downtown environment. And so I think there's an importance to that and that heartbeat that can't be replicated.
100%.
Stacy, so yeah. So one thing I was just going to bring into the discussion is, you know, the demographic shift. So we know that millennials are now the largest population and the oldest millennial is already 40. So the millennials are going to be the force up till 2040. And so I'm just thinking that, you know, if we don't get a vaccine soon or, you know, a more permanent solution to controlling the virus, so the millennials are going to be the millennials who want to stay in the suburbs, right? And the main thing that they'll be concerned about is who's going to take care of my kids. You know, I personally, our office mate went back to Greece because she could not get anyone to take care of somebody and look after her children, especially also if, say, schools don't open. So there's also that whole issue, who's going to take care of your kids, schools don't open, and if I live in the suburb, so then employers will be taking that into account. You know, they have to make adjustments for that. So again, it's also back to thinking how are employers also responding to the needs of the employees, and if there are just these factors that somehow they can't control, right? So I think that's one pressure for offices to maybe say, hey, yes, it makes sense for us, you know, to allow work from home, have that dispersed model. Now, I don't know whether they'll put up a satellite office in there. They could just be that, hey, work from home 2 days a week, but you still have to come to the main downtown office. That's another issue. So, but that's, I think, a consideration that we need to think also. The fact that, you know, this millennial population is there, they're having families, and if the virus isn't contained through a vaccine, they have all these family issues that employers, as good employers, will want to think about.
Do you think, and any of you speaking with clients or colleagues, get the sense that the makeup of the workforce is going to change in terms of what are the skills? I mean, Heather, we touched on a little bit about the productivity versus kind of quality of the workplace. I mean, is this all going to shake out? If you're working from home and those numbers just aren't there, and your HR department and the IT department isn't able to get you to those numbers, is it going to force business leaders to think differently about who they really need on staff? Could this be a huge shakeup in that department?
I'm not sure specifically on the specific talent, but I guess I could speak broadly to, you know, that impact of culture. How are we measuring that? How are we measuring the innovation cycle? I hear a lot on, you know, productivity numbers are up, but how are we measuring productivity pre-COVID? And can we honestly measure productivity during COVID and during the shutdown? I've shared with a lot of people that it's something that has touched me. I've read this book, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. She talks about trust and that it happens in these small moments. And so when I correlate that to the office environment, you know, there's a piece of that trust does innovate or does stimulate innovation. And so how are we going to build trust among employees? And that's that more qualitative side of the equation that I think is really tough to measure. A very specific example of this that I was doing some homework for this, in Psychology Today, they wrote this article about how trust leads to innovation, and they talked about the creation of the Boeing 747, that it only took 16 months to design. And how they accomplished that was they invited the Pan Am engineers into their offices. So basically they put their trust, and they built that trust by like co-mingling together between their engineers and their customers to collaborate on the innovation of that. So I think there's a real speed to market advantage for companies that can really figure out how to either measure this or how to best, support trust, relationship building in whatever solution that they determine is best for them to remain that, competitive advantage for them.
So kind of speaking to that, Greg, I want to ask you about, Heather is making a very strong case for culture and workplace. And I think pretty much everybody on here on the call is we're in real estate. We want people to be together, and we love to network and be together. Does this create an advantage then for a suburban office market? Because let's just say there are less there's more space. There may not be as stringent maybe mask requirements or things like that. Is that playing into some of this decision making? Because we've got short-term, mid-term, and long-term.
Yeah.
But when the economy is going, you're making decisions all along the way. Can you speak to that from any of your clients' experience?
Sure. So I don't want to make a bet on the long-term health of suburban markets versus metro areas, but it's safe to say in most markets, the suburbs have had a tough run. There's been a migration to cities because what Matt said about the community and just that added benefit of occupying space in that community. In the short term, we have seen sublease activity in CBDs that we haven't seen in a very long time. So to give you a sense, in Chicago, a CBD office, it's the amount of sublease space each and every month is a surprise on the high side. So it's grown 70% since COVID. And we are seeing in the last few months, companies deciding to not necessarily move. There hasn't been a lot of like big decisions to move out of the city, but we have seen people set up satellite offices in the suburbs because of ease of access and proximity to some of their employee base. That is happening now. Like we can see it. The sublease activity in most major cities, the slowdown on making commitments to those cities, although there's some exceptions. And then just the logical conclusion that they're a place easier to access, like a suburban environment that isn't in a high rise, and you don't have to have mass transit necessarily. Just logically, we would think people would consider that to be more attractive. But I do want to make this is a really good discussion. I wanted to talk a little bit about the talent that is going to thrive in the future by, let's say, a distributed, working out of a distributed environment. So you might have a certain set of skills, but you might be the type of person that can manage themselves in a distributed manner. And manage up and manage across and develop relationships without having to be present. I think that is that needs to be invested into and probably be part of a selection cycle moving forward on the types of employees you want. And I'm not saying younger, middle-aged, or older folks are any better at any of those skills, but that will be a skill that we need now that we didn't need then. Also, the managers of teams. Some people manage through attendance. Like if I saw you and we spent a lot of time together, it seemed like you were doing a good job. Managing real groups of people, and I think this does impact real estate decisions, is a net new skill for many managers. Where they sit is certainly going to have an impact, but I think managing a professional administrative workforce has changed forever, because it would be hard to argue that we're not going to have a much more distributed workforce in the future. So if companies are prepared to manage in a distributed fashion, guess what? Their real estate portfolio will reflect that. If they're in an industry or they're just not mature enough, or they don't want to take on that that challenge, they'll continue to centralize around hub locations.
Can you speak to a little bit more specifically about the specific decisions that you're hearing people ask about? Like, how are they making those decisions specifically? Is it cost? Is it space? Is it proximity? Is it access to transit?
Well, yeah, so cost, if there's any financial pressure on the business due to COVID, the current recession and what could be a longer term economic negative cycle, cost is a significant driver. And no one wants to cut to the bone when they don't think they have to. But real estate is something that we have proven in the last 5 months that we probably didn't need as much as we thought. Even Heather mentioned this, even pre-COVID, almost any measure of office space would show the space occupied at 50%. So I think people are taking a hard look at the costs associated with their real estate and making some cost-driven decisions based on the proof that there can be a more distributed workforce in the future. Now, you've heard in the press that some companies have decided we're going 100% virtual. Clearly, that is a company-specific decision. But as I said earlier, every company is taking a hard look at the number of roofs they have and then the space that they occupy and see if in the next several years they can make a cost impact, either by changing the location of their office or changing the size of their footprint.
Well,
I was just gonna ask on the talent piece, you know, Tracy, you had mentioned at the beginning, Amazon kind of doubling down and, you know, investing in more office locations for the type of, and I think it's because of the type of talent they're planning to recruit. And it's probably more of that talent that leans into the creative, that need to collaborate more. And I guess, Greg, is that what you're alluding to in terms of the type of talent?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, and just for instance, somewhat independently operating software engineers, coders, there's not, for certain types of work, there's no real benefit of having collaboration, like that type of work, or this kind of piecemeal work that's done would be done as effectively in a private office as you would in a third place or a work from home. Every company will make that decision. But I'm convinced the management of professional employees, we have not exercised that skill to be really good at managing people that are more distributed. And I actually think that could be a gating factor, a cultural factor, an efficiency factor for people not wanting as much distributed workforce.
Yeah, and I was going to add then on the amplification of what maybe was happening pre-COVID to now, to your point, Greg, that analysis of really workflow and really who needs what tools, what spaces in office environments to make them successful to achieve business objectives. I think to what you're describing, really taking a hard look at what employees are thriving on a case by case, and maybe it's department by department or talent by talent, and then supply them with those types of locations, whether that be a virtual type environment or maybe it's a hybrid. You know, it kind of goes back to the private office versus open office, you know, debate.
Matt, can you speak a little bit? We had an audience question on transit and transportation. This issue is of varying degrees of importance depending on the size of the city. In Chicago, I believe, and New York, it would be a driving factor for why people aren't coming to downtown. But what are the conversations you're having with owners and brokers, Milwaukee?
Yeah, I think mass transit will always play its role in a metro environment. I mean, it's going to take a longer bounce back. I mean, we see with our bus systems, even the streetcar now, I mean, limiting capacity just like you would in many situations. But I actually did tune into the annual meeting for the Downtown Seattle organization, and they actually did talk specifically about this, that downtowns that aren't as dependent on mass transit as a Milwaukee or other peer cities will likely have a quicker bounce back because of the ease of driving literally a single family, a single occupant vehicle, and with ample parking, et cetera. So while an organization like ourselves, and just as from an urban planning, theoretical perspective, I mean, mass transit is definitely a good thing, and we're going to continue to advance, the systems that we've put into place. in the immediate term, I think that we have the opportunity on a quicker bounce back for a variety of things that have been stated earlier. It's just easier to get to and from with a single vehicle versus comparing to Chicago. I mean, the last time I flew out of O'Hare, I have friends in the Loop. They left the Loop and I beat them from downtown Milwaukee to the airport just because of the commute from coming to the Loop to O'Hare. So it just shows you that there's major differences. And I think, for a variety of reasons, Milwaukee actually stands pretty deep to actually use that as a lever on coming back quicker.
Yeah, the second tier tertiary markets. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that front, yes. Who wants to get on a train or a bus and pack in anytime soon? Maybe in the future it'll be more comfortable. But for the parking operators, right? So people that would have taken mass transit are now driving. So that seems positive. But then people are only coming in they used to drive 5 days a week and they used to park 5 days a week. Now they have a kind of a shift and they're only coming in once or twice a week. The people who maintain or operate parking garages have a very interesting dynamic ahead of them in all cities, because all cities have parking, but there's something going to happen there. And we're starting to see some creative solutions where it feels as if the parking operators are offering solutions around just the use of from a company, almost allocating a number of spots. And then at some point when those spots run out, then there's a pay to park. That's an interesting dynamic. And even preparing for this talk, just the dynamics of Milwaukee, what it was before COVID and where we are in the middle of COVID and all these things that we're suspecting post-COVID, Milwaukee is a top quartile type company to come out of this and come out of it faster and be stronger as a result of it. It just seems you have all the ingredients to react well to this.
That's what we love to hear. But to your point too, Greg, that's one of those things. If you look at what could get potentially accelerated, I mean, we've always looked at parking structures. I mean, the cost of parking is tremendous, and they're so single use. People are already looking at shared use as you build parking for a daytime and nighttime use, et cetera. I think that just gets further augmented for other types of use beyond parking, like you had mentioned, and folks are going to try to get creative because of, to the point, the flexibility. Maybe you're only driving to the office 3 days a week in the future because we know flexibility will be here. So I think that's another trend that could ultimately, some of these spaces, parking's never a great thing to look at. Do they have a second or third life when they're not being occupied for that? That could be a really interesting opportunity for urban environments.
So I want to make a reminder that if you have a question, please put it in the chat box or ask in the question, the Q&A function on your screen. So I want to also touch on the impact that housing. So we talked a little bit about the fact that we've got more people moving out to the suburbs, because I again, love the downtowns. I want to make the case too for why the suburban market might see some changes and what some of those changes might be. So you've got more people, more housing in the suburban markets, closer to the employees. The transportation is not an issue. Greg or Heather, can you speak to maybe what some of your clients are saying about those decisions, the decisions moving into, occupying some of those spaces?
I guess it's going to let me take it first. I think there will be some look at suburban office market, definitely. And I think, again, it really depends on the type of company, what they're trying to achieve, where their talent is coming from. All those decisions weigh into this. We have been in conversations with two different clients, both mentioning more of this flexible work option, but really to elevate the opportunity to live anywhere. And then to make sure that they're traveling into their corporate headquarters, whether that be in Milwaukee or elsewhere, once a month. And so that's kind of a little bit of a different play on the real estate market, I think, long term. I mean, that definitely has an impact on the amount of square footage that's needed. We have a lot more clients that are taking a harder look at free address type environments to help support more of this flexibility. Free address is basically employees who don't have an assigned desk. I'm not sure that we'll see like 100% free address environments in this market. I think it'll be more of a blend or a mix of that. But that's just some things that we're hearing from our clients, I guess, to answer that question for you.
Well, and that's interesting too, because at the beginning of all of this, we were talking about, at the beginning of COVID with the shutdowns, we were saying we're going to, you know, the shared office space is dead. We're not even going to talk about that anymore. Like is out the door like a salad bar. But now, you know, you're seeing more people, you know, talk about, like you said, free address, hoteling, consolidating to make sure that there's a better occupancy, whatever environment that they have.
Yeah, and I think some of that anxiety around shared space initially was just how COVID could get spread, to be honest, and in kind of looking at what free address can provide long-term for clients. I mean, there is definitely advantages on the flexibility, particularly around if there ever was another pandemic like this, where you could, you know, physically distance from one another, but also integrating more of like a clean desk policy. You know, that there is some strategies that you could then have more frequent cleaning so that, you know, I just mentioned this the other day that the tchotchkes are off the desk. So now we can actually clean the desk. So there are some advantages to that shared space.
So what do you think, and maybe Greg or Matt, or even Gay, if some of your research would point to this, what do you think this will do to real estate prices in the city or in the suburbs? Is there any historical data, whether it was after 9/11, that we could point to either anecdotally or specifically that might give us some indicators for what will happen as we emerge?
You know, I guess if I kick it off, in my conversations with the brokerage community, it seems like, you know, I think Milwaukee definitely functions different on a variety of levels than some of our big markets that might see some bigger ebb and flows. Milwaukee sort of continues to sort of play in here, and even coming out of the last recession, you know, talking with folks that, you know, there might be a couple dollars a foot movement. But Milwaukee sort of kind of stays tried and true, and I think that's an advantage, and sometimes it's a challenge for us to overcome. But we're sort of like in that zone where I think some of the bigger markets will probably see, you know, bigger waves that come out of this. I don't know if Greg, you know, you're obviously national presence, what your thoughts are on that. But, you know, talking locally, we haven't seen, and I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, prices move significantly in any direction at this point.
Yeah, I think if you look at the last economic shocks, prices don't move right away, but invariably when demand is down, supply is up, and prices will move down. Now, for us, we're not sure how long it'll take to get to the trough, and it's surprisingly longer than you would think, and then how quickly we could get back to where we were. But yeah, in the near term, we expect prices to go down because demand is down, and I think it'll actually very much depend on the quality of the municipality, like the Milwaukee dynamics that we've talked about, or a place like New York or Chicago that's more dense and has the mass transit issue.
Well, and interesting too, you said as we move towards the bottom of the trench, I know when you can kind of see it coming, you can also plan a little bit more effectively for when that does happen. And I've heard, at least in the Milwaukee market, that was one of the benefits Milwaukee had, as opposed to a Chicago where those impacts were much greater and much swifter. Kay, did you have a comment?
Yeah, yes, I was just going to say, so right now, there's still no, I mean, the price is not yet reflecting anything because the market is dead. But I mean, Green Street, through their model, their appraisal-based model, they're saying that prices should be down by 10%. But interestingly, if you look at the Real Capital Analytics transactions, prices there are up by 5%. So whatever transactions are out there, I guess they're the cream. So right now we're still seeing price appreciation. The thing is, it's kind of, as Greg said, it's all demand and supply, right? Where is demand going to be? Is it going to be in the suburb, or is it going to be in the CBDs? And just after the Great Recession, the demand was in the CBDs. And so you saw prices there move up about $300 per square foot, about $500 per square foot in the CBD area. But that also, as prices were going up, and I'm talking nationally now, so as prices were going up, that was also the very same factor that then also caused kind of like a reversal to the suburban area. So 2016, your CBD market was taking up around 50%. Now it's just about 35%. So we're still, I guess, trying to think, where is supply going to be, right? Is it going to be in the suburb, or is it going to be in the CBD? And that's where how prices will move. But I guess if you try to think, where is the demand going to be, then we go back to the discussion of what are those factors that will push demand. And I guess one is right now, just the cost differential between the CBD and the suburbs, because we know that some people can work from home. And if you can save costs, office costs from that, right? So maybe you want to say, well, yes, I may not have to now put up my office in the CBD because I can save costs if my office is in the less expensive suburban area. And nationally, that's twice as much. And I think, as you said, I think in Milwaukee, CBD and the suburb is just about a third. So there's not much pressure there for that shift from the downtown to the suburban. And then the other factor would be housing. Again, if employers are thinking, well, my workers are going to be in the suburbs, they're millennial, they're in the suburbs, but they have problems about, having to find a babysitter, problems with their schooling as it is right now. So they may want to support that because they're supportive employers, right? They may want to support that. So then that will shift demand to the suburb. So anyway, that second factor would be housing. And I think the third factor we've already talked about is really the transportation accessibility. If, if not much commuting time, say, again, we're talking of Milwaukee versus Chicago. So less pressure again for demand to move towards the suburban area than the downtown area in Milwaukee compared to Chicago. But the experiment has worked, and there will be demand for people to work from home, and that's what the survey says, right? Among those people who are working from home, 25 are already saying, I want to work from home. I'm already used to it. I don't have, like me, I don't have to go to the office, as Greg said, some people can just work from home. So I think that will cause some demand to shift to the suburban offices more than the CBD. But different case by case on the city basis, but I would say there's less pressure for it in the Milwaukee area than the Chicago.
Right. There is, I think, maybe a fourth or a fifth factor, completely man-made and unprecedented. We have kicked expiration decisions out a year or maybe 2 years. So there is an unnatural lease expiration pileup in our future. And then take into consideration all the critical dates, decision-making dates that people will start to look at as soon as 21 or 22 hit. I think that the demand to make decisions to move, to stay, is going to be increased completely unnaturally, and I think in an unprecedented way, because of the date pileup created by all these short-term movements, and then people actually looking at critical dates that are available in their lease that they wouldn't have otherwise looked at as soon as they get to it in 21 and 22, and that's a big issue for both occupiers and investors. I can't think of anything like this. Even back in the global financial crisis with CMBS loans, there was a kind of a date pileup on maturity dates for the investors to deal with, and frankly, the occupants in those buildings that had CMBS troubled loans. But I think this dwarfs that. I think we have a major date problem coming towards us.
Well, it's going to keep a lot of brokers very busy. Next couple of years. One quick question, and then I'm going to do our wrap question on asset classes. We talk a lot about, and we look at the difference in pricing, availability, vacancy, and obviously quality of our Class A, Class B, Class C office space. Are there any indicators that any of these will outperform any other, or are you saying it's still going to be all based on demand? Because we do have a lot of quality Class A office space coming online, both in the suburbs and in the CBD. No observations on that? Still demand? The golden rule there?
I think class of building, quality of space is incredibly sticky. to the company's culture. They made decisions in the past. They are who they are. They occupy a certain type of space. Switching classes, that's a material decision. And it might happen based on cost constraints, but I think the class of building, type of space, amenities is something sticky for most corporates.
All right.
On the other hand, I think that if you're a new office occupier, you'd want to, I would say, go for a class A where you have good HVAC systems. You know that they're going to purify the air. You know that they've, people are talking now about, HVAC systems, touchless elevators. What else? Plexiglasses, any modern thing, or maybe this data analytics, right? The cameras that, let you see where people are congregating. And so then all this technology driven, analytics and office features that I guess make working healthier or safer there. So I think if you're a new occupier,
that's a great
you probably want to look into that class A, maybe, where you just feel like, hey, it's safer here,
Yeah,
safer for your employees.
And we've got some new product in Milwaukee, that's definitely made that a selling point. That's a great point. If we could just go around the horn and just close with just one takeaway, one final thought about how these decisions are being made in terms of site selection, in choosing where and how our workers work. Let's start with Heather.
So, Greg, music to my ears when you said Chief Human Resource Officer, IT, like the whole C-suite involved in these decisions. I think what we can do for our clients best is get curious around that. So if we're only dealing with one person within the organization, I guess I would ask, how does this location, wherever it's at, support your business goals and your culture long term? And I look at it as three things: people, place, technology. People's the culture side of the organization. It's a three-legged stool that upholds the business's objectives. And so if we can really bring light to that balance for an organization, I think we're really going to help position them strategically for their business.
Great. Gay.
Yes, so I think culture plays an important part, and also the vision and the mission of the company. Like personally at NAR, we know that our CEO at NAR is saying that, hey, yeah, sure. I mean, I know that our employees will do a great job working from home. I trust everyone, but our clients also expect us to be out there, to work with them, and there's just the office is just a great way also to build that culture. We do have water cooler Wednesdays now. We have water cooler Wednesdays. We have the Friday, what do you call that? The Friday cocktails. But I think really, to me, the default mode is that the office wants people to go back to work, and they want them to go back to work safely. So right now, that's where they're investing in how to make the office safe. And hopefully we can bring back people to work. But now if there are circumstances, for some reason you can't, and I keep talking about family, we will be flexible. So I think flexibility is going to be play a key part in the decision making of companies moving forward, and how they'll allow their people to work from home. And that will dictate also the kind of office geographical portfolio that they will have.
Perfect. Flexibility. All right, Matt.
Yeah, I can absolutely just build on that. I think that we all know the office is here to stay, but there's modifications and there's things that are going to come out of this. And I think flexibility, exactly that. And if I'm an employer, how do you build that flexibility into your sort of package of what you're offering, right? If you formerly demanded 5 days a week in the office, but now it's more convenient for a young family to not be there on a Thursday or something like that, you're going to try to work that in. And I think it would be a smart solution. But I think at the end of the day, innovation, and the cities have always been the first adapters and where innovative thought is coming out of. I think downtowns and a physical place, as human beings, we need to interact. There is no doubt about it. And I think the more and more that we just see research coming out about sort of some of the mental stimulation that we need to be with each other, I think that all plays well for cities and downtowns. And so I think the ones that can continue to pivot and react and understand what this sort of ever-changing environment needs are gonna rebound quicker. And I think Milwaukee's well positioned in that environment, just based on a variety of factors, some created and some just by happenstance. Yeah, I think I'm optimistic, and I think you can just start to see it on a week-by-week basis. There's a rebound. We all look a little bit different with masks and et cetera, but you can just start seeing people urging for life to get whatever that new normal sort of looks like, and I think we stand poised to welcome that back.
Great. And Greg, we'll cap it off with you. What are your thoughts,
Sure.
what advice and takeaways?
Yeah, sure. For the owners and the investors, I think we've talked about this. You now have 2 or 3 more influencers on the decision, the space decision in terms of location as well as size and safety. So there's risk in HR and not just in finance and IT. I think you've got a bigger group to sell to the occupiers. This is a chance. We've proven over the last 4 or 5 months that businesses can operate with some effectiveness. If you're looking at your
He's paused.
I think he's paused.
Yeah.
I think we ended with a
So
Greg, are you with us? All
I
right.
knew Greg said something excellent.
That was very poignant.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. I really appreciate everyone's expertise, time. I know there are lots of questions. And also, following this call, if you're willing to, share some time if there's any follow-up questions, I think that would be great. These are great resources we have within our community. Great discussion. I think Milwaukee is, we're bullish on Milwaukee, suburbs or CBD. We've got a great real estate community. We've got very smart people, and we're very optimistic and are ready to handle whatever comes before us. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.